right, Steve, welcome to the podcast. We're so delighted that you're here and that we're all together on the same date. And we can't wait to just ask you about all of the, we have so many questions for you.
You have to explain that comment.
Yes.
Well, we scheduled this months ago and then you were so punctual. You came 1 month early.
That's right.
We had FOMO that we weren't
to the
there.
actual hour, a month early, I show up and you guys weren't around. And I was like, that's super rude. I mean, my dad said, if you're not a month early, you're late. So I don't know where you guys were. I can't believe this is such a great, fantastic introduction to our subject today. The ADHD guy that looks at his calendar and happens to pin it a month early. But it ended up being so great because I didn't have time. This week has been crazy, so I didn't really have time to prepare thoughts. Because often in podcasts, I show up spontaneously and I want to just shoot from the hip. But this one I really feel so strongly about. And I'm such a giant fan of this podcast that I actually did something I never do. I prepared.
Well, that means so much to us. Thank you. And this is what we want to talk about. I've heard you talk about ADHD as a superpower.
Yes.
And I don't think we've ever really, definitely never had an ADHD episode, but I think that.
Oh, you did and you forgot. Yeah.
Maybe that could definitely be. But I want to dive into that. But I think that because of course our audience knows you from, they know you from Restore and of course are fans of the Piano Guys, and we are such fans of you and your family.
That. Thank you.
But I want to hear about what you were like as a kid. I was thinking about all the different ways I've seen you play the cello. Like not as not the way I've
supposed to be played.
Literally anyone else play the cello. Yeah. And I was like, I was a teacher when our kids were young. And I thought I wonder what that looks like in 4th grade, you know?
My gosh.
So maybe can we start there? Will you just talk about what you were like growing up?
Shout out to my dad and my mom. My dad in particular, my mom, both of them just must have just pulled out their hair 10 times over trying to raise me. And my dad never gave up on me despite several music teachers encouraging him to do so. It was just, and he was there at every cello lesson. And my dad, he passed away a little while ago. He had vascular dementia. And dementia is a wonderful gift because it actually could get someone to open up a little bit more and really tell you how they really feel. So he said I was his worst child. And Whoa. It was such a great moment. It was out of love. He's like, you were my heart, not worst. That's not right. You were my hardest child. Yeah. But that's why I love you the most. And I recorded it, sent it to my siblings, and I'm just kidding. But I bonded with my father through the hardship of my childhood.
Wow.
In profound ways. And it was when my father's a traditional man. He believed in you pick a career, you stick to it. You are practical. He was very pragmatic, but he was a brilliant intellectual. And you can't imagine the gift that I got to grow up in. My mother was an opera singer who gave it up to be a mom. And when she sang, she would transport people. She was an angel on earth when she would sing. And she was so passionate about music that I couldn't help but pick up on it. Wow. And I believe that's how you teach passion for something. And my dad could name every classical composer and piece of music. We'd be driving down the street, and he'd turn on Classical 89 and it'd be in the middle of a symphonic piece of music. And he'd say, all right, Steve, what is the period of music? Who's the composer and what movement is this? Wow. And as a kid, I'd be like, there's a harpsichord and basso continuo. That's probably, we're looking at Baroque period. I hear a lot of violins, so I'm thinking it's probably Vivaldi. And then this is slow. It's more largo, so it's probably second movement. He goes, as I said, I didn't know until later that he didn't know most of the time any of the answers. He was just pretending to.
Oh my gosh.
But isn't that so cool?
That's amazing.
So I have this wonderful blend, this amalgam of passion and poise and intellect. And I just felt like it was just this bastion of, or maybe it was like a petri dish for just being so creative in my life and so musical. So, but I was, if you watch home videos, there's a famous one in my family where we're having family home evening. traditional good old family home evening. And the camera is, the camera, which is like, must have been like this big, and you can hear the whirring of the tape in it. And it's panning. And there's my sister. She's leading the music. This is traditional family home evening, man.
I'll say, yeah.
Yeah. And she's leading the music and everybody's singing. And it pans over to me. And I'm on a chair and I've got this Beatles haircut that's just sort of, and I'm banging my head on the chair, like I'm sitting, cross-legged, banging my head onto the chair, not singing.
That's
and
incredible.
my parents are just like, that's just kind of how he is.
Wow.
I was always moving. So when I got to about junior high, which was the peak of my self-esteem, my dad kind of he finally, the worries for me came to a head.
Okay.
And he came to me and he said, Steve, I'm worried about you. And your grades are not good. And that was really concerning for my dad because he was a physician, again, traditional. You go all the way to master's degree, PhD, and so he was concerned about that. And he said, I've also noticed your friendships, like they're not sticking because I'd be annoying to kids. I not intentionally, I just didn't have very many inhibitions. My prefrontal cortex was like an adolescent child. And so I would just kind of do whatever came to my mind. And so sometimes it would bother my friends. And so it was hard. So he's like, and then he said, reproving B times with sharpness. He's using D&C 121, follows up with an increase of love. But he said, you're a smart kid. I know you're brilliant and you're a lot of fun to be around. So something's wrong. And I admitted to him finally, I said, Dad, when I go to school, I look around and everybody's laser focused on the teacher. And all I feel like doing is standing up, running around and slapping somebody. Like that seriously is my impulse,
Wow.
And he's like, okay. So he took me to a psychiatrist. I didn't know. I mean, I was scared. I hid in a closet because I was so scared. What is a psychiatrist? So he takes me. And I remember the psychiatrist ran some tests and diagnosed me with ADHD. And my dad being a physician, he didn't know what that meant. This is the 90s, all I remember, Aubrey and Tim, as I walked out of that office, it's such a powerful memory for me, in tears. I had tears streaming down my face. It was one of the first times I remember really sobbing because I thought it meant I was broken.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I have discovered that ADHD is my superpower. But I want to take it one step further today. I want to talk about ADHD as a spiritual gift. And I want to frame it in that mindset and really explore that with your listeners today. Both you listening that have ADHD and maybe your children as well. It often runs in the family. I want to hit it head on. And I want to talk about how awesome it is. When it comes to creativity and hyper-focusing on our work that God has for us to do, there's nothing better. When it comes to general focus, it's not so good. It's really rough. It's rough. Yeah. So, but I want to just hit that.
I love that.
Oh my
Let's
gosh,
talk about the concept of spiritual gifts, maybe generally. It sounds like you have a broader or more expansive definition, maybe of spiritual gifts than just the list you might find in the scriptures.
Yeah, certainly. I to be prescriptive about that list, there would be no way you could fill all the books in the world with the number of spiritual gifts I think that exist. And I think that's made fairly clear, not necessarily in the scriptures themselves, but in successive revelation. I think it's been very clear that not all the lists. It's not comprehensive. It's not a comprehensive list.
Yeah.
And that makes it fun because it says the God tells us to seek the best gifts, seek gifts in your life. Isn't that a wonderful process we can have in our relationship with God to be like, hey, can you teach me what my gifts are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that we spent so much time in the premortal life developing our personalities and our gifts. We've been who we are for a very long time, Elder Maxwell said. And Elder Maxwell also said we're in the second act of a 3-act play. And we don't know much about the first or the third act. And that's why we frustrate ourselves sometimes because we assert that, okay, we need to know everything. And we really know very little about the first and the third act. So it's exciting to me to be able to explore that.
Yeah. Maybe, go ahead, Aubrey.
Well, so connect those dots for it. It's like, how do you go from, hiding in a closet and tears streaming down your face and like the shame and pain of like feeling like you have just been diagnosed with a brokenness that is not fixable to this way of thinking about it? Like what happened in the middle that sort of transformed your way of understanding this gift?
That's a great question. I want to back up and talk about ADHD as a diagnosis. We have to understand that this attention deficit tendency dates back to the 1700s. You know, we have scientists that have logged studies of this, but it was labeled in the 80s. Now I have to stress this fact. I think we looked at the pantry of life in the 80s and we've mislabeled the macaroni. I think we have looked at a canister of a white powder and we've called it our best guess without getting into it and tasting it, really. I think it's flour. Is it powdered sugar? Is it baking soda? Well, those are very different things. And in the 80s, like that's when we had big bangs and big shoulders. Like, how are we okay with calling this the ADHD when that's when we labeled it? You know, this is what's interesting. If you look at how we looked at neuroscience in the 80s, neuroplasticity was understood as to be absolutely stagnated after the age of 8.
Wow.
That is proven completely false.
Yeah.
We now know that the brain can be completely rewired throughout life. Why do we keep calling this ADHD? I think it's mislabeled. And we're starting to discover that, and people are starting, it's hard. We get into lockstep, right? I think we're in this sort of one size fits all medical culture, and it's difficult, and it tends to be an aircraft carrier when we're trying to turn it about. And I think that's important to recognize is that I don't believe it's attention deficit. In fact, it's attention abundant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very different that way. So I think, and I also think it's kind of action deficit. So we're going to talk about that, but let's stay with this for just a little bit. So I'm trying to stay focused, which is very difficult for me to do, as you can tell. So if you're wondering why I go off on tangents, it's because I'm practicing what I'm preaching. So if you look at the diagnosis of it, you have to be very careful about putting this label on yourself or your children. Just be very careful about it because, again, it's very misunderstood.
Yeah. One question I have about that. So and this is, coming from a layperson who knows very little about ADHD. So when I hear the name attention deficit, and then I think about somebody like you, it doesn't match up for me at a superficial level, because in my view, to become the type of musician you are, there must have been so many weekly hours of practice that I'm like, okay, so how can you have attention deficit? And I think this is potentially what you're saying.
Yes.
And be able to be that committed to something to become such a true expert at what you do. So maybe in that light, could you explain what a better label might be?
I think that is such a great way, Tim, of explaining our misunderstanding and mislabeling of this. How could we call something attention deficit when one of its hallmarks is hyperfocus? Yeah. That doesn't make sense to me. It's contradictory. I think we need to look at this. Let's put our Halversonian hat on. Shout out to my man Jared. I love that he looks at life never in a one-dimensional way. Yeah, I've really loved and appreciated what he's taught me. Sorry, I had this moment in my life when I discovered that anytime we're looking at something one-dimensionally, we're looking at it as if it's the adversary's plan and not Jesus's plan. Because he was all about getting us in a one-dimensional plane so that there was no development. And why do we insist on looking at ADHD one-dimensionally, where we only look on one side of the coin? Well, unfortunately, it's kind of what we think others think of us, because they see our embarrassing habits, or when we forget, or when we come a month early to a podcast. Or the other day, I was so awesome and woke up extra early so my wife could sleep in, and I made breakfast for the kids, and I was going to make them pizza for their lunch, and I put it in the oven on a cutting board, a plastic cutting board. So when I opened the oven, the cutting board had melted, form-fitted to my oven. And I open it up, and all my kids are like, whoa. And my wife looks at it and she just goes, wow, because she understands me and I love her for it. But so we look at those traits and we think that that's what people are hyperfixated with us. Yeah. And it's not true. So, but let's think about it. I want to ask a couple questions. Number one, you can either serve your weakness or you can serve your purpose. So I want you to ask the question, is your ADHD is your ADHD your defining weakness, or is it part of your eternal purpose? So if you ask yourself that question now, let's go further. I love this. This is the question. These are the questions I ask myself. I want you, the listeners, to all ask yourself and your children this question. Are you cursed with debilitating distraction, oversensitivity, and impulsivity? Or are you blessed with abundant creativity, discernment, and spontaneity? The answer is both.
Yeah.
Now, here's where it's important. This is to answer your question, Aubrey. What happened between tears on my face, broken in the office, out of this office, to now? I have discovered that as you turn your gift over to God, the curses wither and the blessings blossom. How does this happen? It's on my Jesus questions list. I don't know how it happens, but I believe that's the definition of grace, is weakness into strength. Mm-hmm. His grace is sufficient for us. Ether 1227 was written for ADHD people. It's written for a lot of people, but I want you to read it as if it's written directly to you and your ADHD. If men and women come unto me, I will show them their weakness. For I give women and men weakness that they may be humble. And if they humble themselves before me, they will see that my grace is sufficient for them. My grace is sufficient for all people who humble themselves before me. And if they come unto me, what happens? I will make weak things strong. That is my life story, as I have turned my life over to my God as best I can. And I've turned my weaknesses over to him, and he has turned them into strengths. God is the ultimate miracle maker. He turns our messes into miracles. Mm-hmm. And if we let him be involved in those messes and bring him into the messes, they turn into miracles. And I am such a grateful recipient of that promise.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I don't know if this has ever come up on the podcast, but last summer I was literally at a retreat with Thomas McConkie, meditating and just like struggling
he's
every
like
minute.
He's like my antithesis. Like he's the guy that I'm just like, wow. I mean, he's like my hero. I went to a yoga class once. Yeah. And they're like, focus on a point on the wall for 30 seconds. I looked around. I was like, how are people doing this? I'm like, oh.
Okay. Yes. I was relating to that and frustrated. It was just, and literally during the lunch break at that weekend, I got this phone call from the doctor that I had been testing with, and she told me that she thinks that my results were consistent with an ADHD diagnosis. Oh, literally, like at the retreat.
That's so awesome.
But I thought I was prepared for that. Like I had felt like really what propelled me was that I was so frustrated that for the 5 or 6 years we've been doing this podcast, literally every week I'm like, this is the week we're going to get 1 week ahead. I'm going to just get 1 week ahead.
Wouldn't that be great?
For 5 years. Yeah. And I started reading about ADHD in women, and I thought like, man, maybe actually this all sounds very familiar. So I felt like I was prepared that was probably what she was going to say, but I was surprised how much it actually like hurt to hear that. But as I've been kind of marinating this last year and really thinking about, even just the flow of the podcast. And I've realized kind of just what you said, that like, actually these bursts of energy are the fuel that makes this even possible. Like I've been so mad at myself for these years that I can't read a book 20 pages at a time for a month and then be prepared for the interview. Like I have to do it in 3 days. And that I like hated that I kept doing that over and over. And what I've realized is, that is actually the gift for me, because it's very fresh when we come to these conversations. Like it's so fresh because it literally happened yesterday, Wow. But I think it's taken some time to just sort of let go of the expectations that I've had about what it should look like to be calm and steady and do life in this very consistent energy way, and just let my brain be what it is and I feel like this is what I've leaned into and what I've started opening up to, that maybe my brain is exactly what I need, and like maybe God knows that and this is okay. But this very uncomfortable, that feels like a real wrestle, and it really does feel, I'm not sure yet even how much of what's hard is my resisting what's natural, and how much is hard just because it's genuinely a worse way to do it. I don't know. But I'm starting to open up to maybe it's really about my expectations versus where my gifts are actually pulling me. Wow. So I really like hearing you just completely reframe these things that I feel very personally as our weaknesses is so interesting, because I do feel like that's the quiet lesson that my heart is sort of opening up to this year.
I mean, that you just encapsulated the transformation that needs to happen in everybody that is, quote, diagnosed with this, which I don't even like the word diagnose. But I want to give you some perspective.
Okay.
So I've looked for ADHD moments in the scriptures.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I found one that's my favorite. I want to share it with you.
Okay. I have no idea where you could be going with this.
It's 392 words of a run-on sentence. 392 words, run-on sentence. I've always wanted to write a book as a tangent. I've always wanted to write a book that says, "Do I have ADHD?" on it in the front cover. And it's 2 pages. The first page is a big, long run-on sentence. And the second page is no. Because you made it. You made it through the sentence. Yeah. If you didn't,
gosh,
if you kept putting it down, then you have it, you know?
Yeah.
And so, okay, I want to set this up for you. Okay. So 392 words. If I were to read this to you, which I don't know if I don't think we have the time to do it now. And yeah, I would lose your listeners. I mean, it would just feel that way. If I were to read it to you, you'd be like, wow, that's probably somewhere in the Old Testament, you know, like it's discombobulated. It's kind of all over the place. It's multi-layered contextual and it's not. It's 3rd Nephi. It's chapter 21, and it's the words of our Savior. And after I read it, he talks about a sign that we're going to see. And he starts to talk about the sign. And before he tells you what the sign is, he goes off on a tangent. And then he says, okay, now getting back to the sign. And then he goes off on another tangent. And then he talks about the sign again. Then he's like, well, yeah, but before I tell you about the sign, you probably should understand this too. If I read it to you, you'd be like, whoa.
Oh my gosh.
And you know what I've realized? I'm going to take a Joseph Granny approach with this, okay? So there are 3 possibilities. One is that Jesus Christ is not a very good communicator. That's false. We know that's completely false. He's perfect. In fact, he was in his perfected state when he was with the Nephites. So that's wrong. Number 2 is the scribe maybe was having a bad day or slacking off. If you were the scribe of the Savior of mankind, would you slack off? No, I think you'd probably get every word right. So that's probably not likely. Or maybe it's the 3rd, which is we don't fully understand yet the capacity of the brain and the divine potential. And that thoughts, if we have certain expectations of how they should run and how sentences should happen, how clear communication should be, perhaps we should rethink it entirely. And I love that the Savior, maybe he was speaking directly to us when he was saying this. But if you read it, you'll be astounded.
Wow.
And I think here's the deal is we're so label happy. Why in the world are we so label happy? So we've labeled everybody into 2 categories. Bill Murray said it was either people who like Neil Diamond or people that don't like Neil Diamond. You know, that's why his wife and he didn't work out, you know, but the world has labeled us into neurotypical or neurodivergent. I think it's false. I think that's a false categorization because I think we're all neurodivergent. I think there's too much nuance in this beautiful life to assume that anyone could define what neurotypical means. Because if we define it, then that means people are normal and other people are abnormal. That doesn't make sense to me. So I actually prefer just thinking we don't have a homogeneous culture of the way we should think or communicate or be creative. Mm-hmm. But if the Savior of mankind can teach me a principle in 392 run-on sentence, I feel okay about the fact that I don't always align perfectly with what is called neurotypical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
That's interesting. Let me ask you this, and I very much don't want to make this about me, but just to give
Let's
you an
make
example.
It personal. No, I love how personal. That's one of the hallmarks of how good you are at what you do, is it's not abstraction. It's personal.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
That's
I love
very,
that.
that's
So
very, very kind.
I'd say go personal.
Okay. So my experience with mental health is my OCD diagnosis, which I've talked about a couple times on the podcast.
Yes.
And I love what you're saying, Aubrey. And I think that you're in agreement with, it sounds like, Steve, that like maybe this is such a gift that you should lean into it and just sort of like let it. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. So like correct me after this. But like sort of like let it be, lean into it. And with OCD, my experience has been a little bit different than that. I cannot safely just sort of like lean into my OCD and let it do its thing.
That's a
and
good point.
Simultaneously, it has been a gift for me. Like, you know, it's sort of like perfectionism on steroids in some ways,
right? You
know, and if I take that to its extreme, I'm in a really, really bad place.
Yeah.
And that was my experience on my mission. It was my experience for several years after. I'm now, because of good therapy, have tools to address it. You can never really be cured of OCD,
right.
But you can definitely get it on the back burner, and that's where I'm at now. I think if you dial it back, it really, like, in its sort of like moderated state, really is a gift. Like I think that sort of like almost perfectionism lets me do things really well. Like when I'm making an argument, not like in an argument per se, but like if I'm writing, you know, I cover all my bases. Like I can be persuasive for that reason. People can count on me generally if I say I'm going to do something.
Love that.
And so like it is a gift in that way, but taken to an extreme, it becomes a real weakness to the extent that it should be addressed in some way. So I'm not actually saying anything about ADHD. This is really just a question. Has that been your experience? Is there a necessity to dial it back and not let it run wild? Or in your experience, is it saying, no, this is a gift, I'm going to just let it be what it is? Or is there some in between?
That's a great clarification, because let's go back to the coin. You know, what side is face up?
Yeah.
And if we just decide that it doesn't matter, I think that's the wrong approach. I think that's the wrong approach. I think if we let it run wild, I think that's exactly what you'll get is wild. And that's moderation, temperance. Those are great spiritual words that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything should ever be the extreme. I do believe that ADHD, and perhaps it could be the same for OCD. I can't speak for that. ADHD can be chains or wings. I think it can be either. I do think that you have to understand that why do men and women have weakness from God? Let's back up. I give men and women weakness that they may be humble. That's the primary purpose of it.
Yeah.
So humility, it doesn't sound like it's humble to let it run wild completely.
Yeah.
I don't think that sounds like a humble approach. I think that just sounds like I don't care, like a sort of an agnostic or even worse, toxic approach.
Yeah.
Because you care enough about yourself and the people around you, it makes sense to bridle your passions and bridle whatever gifts you've been given.
Yeah.
Opposition in all things. Every gift has its opposite. Every superpower has its kryptonite. So that's important to recognize. And using those in concert and in harmony with each other is really the blend. You know, I love when Lehi in chapter 2 of 2 Nephi, that's where I'd send everybody to try to understand the beauty of opposition in all things and how necessary it is for the plan of God to actually be operable.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that mirrors my own story in some ways, like that humility that's sort of like required before something becomes a strength. Yeah. You know, like there was a point, when was it? Like 6-7 years after my mission where it got so bad that I was mostly completely debilitated. And Aubrey, you know, basically made me start to address it. And
were you married at that point?
We were married,
How long were you married at that point?
We got married 6 months after my mission. So for quite a while. I mean, most of my post-mission life, you know, we had been married, and she knew me well enough without being able to label it that like, this thing that tends to happen is really, really bad right now, I think was the
probably
the
about how we were talking about it.
Yeah.
And like that, and I don't want to say like, and so I was so humble, but like it was a humbling moment to need to have it addressed. Yeah. You know, like I need help. Yeah. You know, that's a very humbling thing. Yeah. And I do think in the moment since, there have been little glimpses of like, okay, maybe that was meant to happen so that other things could happen in some way. And I'm always hesitant to like connect the dots directly because stories don't always work out like that. But I think even, you know, addressing it, you know, has led to moments where I've been really grateful for. Okay. In the sense that like I've been able to share it on this podcast, and people have, you know, people have found us later and said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know I had OCD." And it's like, "Oh, okay, wow." That moment of being humbled was necessary for some good things to happen. Yeah. And so I love that you're bringing that scripture to life. It seems to map really well to my own experience.
You haven't served your weakness, you've served your purpose. I think that's the difference between what you've done here, Tim. And let me ask you this question. Is OCD your defining weakness, or is it part of your eternal purpose? Yeah. Is part of God's work for you to do? Is OCD a part of God's work for you to do? I believe it is. Yeah. Because you're overcoming something and you're recognizing that you can't do it without God. Mm-hmm. How can you have a relationship with God if you're good without him? If you don't need him, and you've needed him desperately at times in your life, And that has opened your mind to be so empathetic to other people, which I think is the ultimate Christ-like attribute. I mean, he is the perfect empathizer, but he wants to delegate that empathy to us because he wants us to feel the spiritual beauty in empathy. And if without empathy, what are we? We're cold robots. We just are. And so the fact that the overcoming, the humility, and the empathy that you develop through those, how could that not be part of your work that God has for you to do? Remember, I can't do Tim's work.
Yeah.
Tim can't do Steve's work. I can't do Aubrey's work. But you have to understand, part of the reason why I can't do your work is because I haven't overcome OCD like you have.
Yeah.
And OCD is always with you. You don't overcome it so that it's non-existent. I will say that it gets better. I want people out there with ADHD, and you can attest to this with OCD, that as you practice, the cello was very difficult. It always been difficult. In fact, I played it 40 years. And I sat down with it the other day and I was like, I wonder if I'm ever going to get this. I really had that thought authentically. That wasn't false modesty. And I really feel like it's a great microcosm and analogy for life. I think your ADHD, it's going to take practice. But as you lean into the blessings and lean away from the curses and hand it over to God, you will see the curses wither and the blessing blossom. You really will. It doesn't mean let the curses run wild. That's not the point. So let's talk about a principle for that's a beautiful principle of ADHD. Let's talk about a church life hack. Okay.
Okay.
So if you're in church and your mind starts wandering, do you punish yourself? Do you berate yourself? Do you get after yourself? Do you? Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah.
Okay. That's one side of the coin. The other side, I'm going to tell you about the other side that I've discovered in my life. It's something I call self-suggestibility. I actually have discovered that so many of my ADHD buddies are their general proclivity or their general inclination is meekness, because we love learning and lapping up stuff. In fact, we love learning so much that we don't stick with something for a long time. Like we'll lean in, like if we're pickleball, I'm like, I'm getting the $400 paddle, I'm signing up for the membership. And then the next week I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, what was that all about? We lean into it. Why? Because I think that there actually is a sponge mentality, but I think there's some meekness to it too, which is exciting.
Wow.
And that ties into self-suggestibility. What is self-suggestibility? My prefrontal cortex is not a TSA agent. Some people's prefrontal cortex is a TSA agent. You're able to gatekeep thoughts and actions before they happen or before they stay around too long. But some people think in ADHD, and please, can I just dispel this? I have to dispel this. Some people think that ADHD means the prefrontal cortex is broken, and it's not. It is a super cute, energetic toddler. And that needs a little bit of help, a little bit of training, maybe adolescent, maybe even. And some days it's so fun and on point. And some days it is a torrential nightmare and it's just off in the weeds. But here's what's interesting about self-suggestibility is that when the Spirit is trying to prompt me with something, it can prompt me out of left field because it knows that thought's going to get to me.
Yeah.
It's not related to what's happening in the context of right now.
Yeah, that's cool.
But it can throw a curveball at me and I'll take a swing.
Yeah.
So that's a wonderful gift. The Spirit can give me a lot of thoughts. Now, do they come at once and there are 20 of them? Yeah, sometimes. But with practice, I have discovered that you can actually get better at figuring out which thoughts are ones to grab a hold of amid the myriad tidal wave sometimes that happens. So that's important to understand. And that's part of the spiritual gift of ADHD is self-suggestibility. The Spirit has the ability to give you an unrelated prompting. Yeah. And you will entertain it. Because your prefrontal cortex is a cute toddler. It's like, let that one through. That sounds fun. Ooh, shiny. It's like, that's fun. Yeah. So, and this is another analogy I'll give. Like I have a cute dog. It's a mini golden doodle mixed with a cavalier. I mean, it's like the perfect combo. It's this cute little curly haired dog. Yeah. And when she goes on walks, boy, I mean, it is so much joy for her that when you got her on the leash, she's just yanking at that leash. Now, but let me ask you this question. Is Brio, my dog, is she trying to throw me off my path and annoy me? Or is she just so excited to discover treasures? Yeah. I want you to think of your thoughts as a playful puppy that's trying to discover treasures rather than trying to throw you off or make your life difficult. Now, in some instances, you need to use a different leash that tells the puppy, this is a walk where I need you to stay close to me. And there are other days where I have that nice long leash that has the elastic thing that you can kind of bring in and let out. And I just let her sniff at everything because it's so joyful for her. Yeah. So when you're sitting in church and your mind wanders, let it wander for a little bit. Yeah. Recognize that it might be trying to find some hidden treasures in what the person's saying, in what your life is, where you are in life. Let it wander a little bit. Don't berate yourself. Yeah. Don't criticize yourself. Don't jump on yourself so hard. Now, when you get to the sacrament, it's hard for ADHD people because it's a minute and a half of a prayer that is the keystone of your week. And guess how many times it's gone by and I said, oops, I was totally not present. I am so grateful for the deacons that have to say it again because I love the second sacrament. It is my jam. But I have discovered that this is a little bit easier if, when the sacrament comes around, say it along with it. Under your breath. Yes. Oh, wow. Out loud. Yes. You're saying out loud. Out loud. Say it under your breath. You're not going to bother anybody. In fact, with my children, I have children with ADHD tendencies and I love them for it. And I put them on my lap and I actually whisper it in their ear. Wow. And which is funny because then one time when we got to the closing prayer, my daughter's like, okay, do it again. And I was like, oh, this one I don't know. But so I want you to whisper it under your breath so that you don't lose that moment. You know, because that's such a critical moment. And your mind is in 10 places at once. And then after the sacrament, it's a great opportunity to let your mind wander around, find hidden treasures, but be warned that if you go too far into the territory of self-criticism, it's not the intention of the sacrament. The intention of sacrament has never been, I've never seen a scripture that says, this is your time to catalog all the things you're doing wrong. I actually got into a really downward cycle once in the sacrament. And it happens where I was just like frustrated with myself. And I'm saying, God, I can never get this right. And, I joke around. I'm like, every time I try to talk to God about one of my mistakes, say prayer about a mistake, he's like, hey, if you're going to make another mistake, could you make a new one at least, just to change things up? And I'm just berating myself over these mistakes I keep making and that are redundant. And I was like, God, will you please? And I finally just got out of it. I was like, okay, Jesus, I need you. Will you please just tell me something I'm doing right? Just one thing. And I think God knows me. And 2 Nephi, chapter 32, where he talks about God speaks to us according to our language. I love that. Yeah. It doesn't mean language like English. It means like where we really communicate, He knew that if he would have said, oh, you're a good dad, you're a great cellist, you really, and like name all my accomplishments, I'd just be like, I'd blow them off. So he takes me and he says, I say, tell me one thing I'm doing right. He says, I love that you keep striving. I love you for that. And that's all he had to say. Because I do. I try to show up. And that was a great moment for me. So maybe that's something important to recognize in sacrament time as a church life hack is if you start going down the pathway of darkness, of the pit of despair, just give it to Jesus and talk with him and just say, hey, can you help me out of this? Yeah. Let's talk about something that is going to be more productive, more spiritually uplifting rather than me just berating myself.
Oh, I love that idea so much. Like this idea that God knows your brain and is going to use your brain to communicate in like that in your language. And so it might be this abundance of ideas. Yes. Like that might be your language with God or this burst of energy. I think that's something I've learned about myself that like I can trust that energy is pushing me into a good place. And I think it was scary. It was scary to wonder if that would like, I kept trying to differentiate, like, is this just my brain? Is this just dopamine or is this God's voice? And I think, I don't know, I'll never know. Right. But I think that it's been more useful to just say, I am going to trust that God is working with my brain. And so when I get an idea that lights me up and the dopamine is flowing, like I'm going to just follow that a little bit and see what happens. And it feels like the experience is that usually that's good fruit. And so if there's another way, maybe that will evolve over time, but it's comforting to think of this in a both and way like that like there may be challenges that are going to require some humility and some tempering or bridling. And like, maybe I can just be creative about these tendencies and trust that God can find a way to work through them too.
I love that. And I love what Sharon Eubank once said. She said, why do we keep asking the question, is it God or is it me? Why can't it be both?
Yes.
Why can't it be both?
Yeah.
And usually it is. Yeah. Because you're like, Elder Bednar talks about this all the time. He's just like, just stop worrying about it.
Yeah.
We obsess over it. Just be a good girl or a good boy. And I think he's saying that. It sounds a little bit like rudimentary, but I think he's just trying to say simplify it. Yeah. Be a good girl or a good boy and just move and stop being a stick in the mud and stop worrying about it because it's both. Yeah. It could be both. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Just stop worrying about it.
Yeah. I think one thing that strikes me, I love the idea that you have like one of the gifts of ADHD is you just have a million ideas all the time. Right. And I know a lot of people, look up to you for your creative and professional success. I'm curious in that. I mean, it's indisputable, I think. And I'm just curious if you could give an example of a time or two that tendency that you have to have a million creative ideas has affected you in that way, because I'm sure there are a lot of young people that like would like to emulate in their own way what you've done. I would love for people to listen to, and this isn't just self-promotional, sorry. I would love for people to listen to a piece I call the Cello Song. It's Johann Sebastian classical piece. Yes. He wrote it for one cello. As an ADHD kid, I was like, I wonder if I could add 7 more cello parts to this. So I was strumming my cello. I was banging on my cello. I was using film score compositional techniques. I was exploring the versatility of the instrument like it's never been explored before. Wow. How old were you? I was 13, 14 years old. Wow. So that would have never happened if I was, quote, neurotypical, whatever that means. Again, I don't like that term. But it really, I think my gatekeeper would have said, get back to Bach. Yeah. But I said, I want to explore this. And that was one of the songs that launched the Piano Guys. Yeah. And it was one of the songs that helps me feel like I can fly. Yeah. And it was truly me. It was truly an expression. Remember, music's not about perfection. It's about expression. That's an important distinction to make. Life should be that same way. And so for me, that was so expressive. And I felt like it was so cathartic. And so ADHD is a superpower only when it's channeled. In fact, that's the opposite of what you were talking about. I should have thought about that. When you let it run wild and not channeled, not honed, it's a nightmare. But when it's channeled, it's so good. Wow. And that's the result. The result, I call Cello Song my ADHD jam. Actually, I call it ADHD put to good use is the unofficial title of it. But I want to give you another example that I rarely tell. And we're sitting in the studio. I'll never forget this moment. Beginning of the Piano Guys, we're arranging it was an Adele song, Rolling in the Deep. You remember that jam? Yeah. Yep, totally. Great song. And I get to the second verse. And what is that old Scout song? Second verse, same as the first, a little bit louder and a little bit worse. Because it was just like, I'm a cellist. What am I going to do? Guess what Adele does in the second verse? It's the exact same. She changes the words. Well, guess what? I don't have words on the cello. So I was like, I get to the second verse and I'm like, I'll just play the same melody again. And I'm like, this is lame and boring. And what happened? The prefrontal toddler said, I got some ideas. What if we do this? And out of the blue, a classical melody I had not heard for 10 years that was just playing in my house, comes to my mind. And I play that right over the top of Adele's Rolling in the Deep. It's a melody, one of the greatest melodies ever written from a suite of symphonic pieces called The Planets by Gustav Holst. It's from his Jupiter suite. Where did it come from? I don't know. I believe it was inspiration, but my mind let it in. Yeah. And I started playing it. And I remember Al, my buddy Al, music producer, Piano Guys, he's like, what is that? He's like, that's what we need. And I was like, I was just messing around. He's like, no, I'm recording that. That was the beginning of blending pop and classical. We didn't sit down at a table and say, we should blend pop and classical. It actually happened completely organically, thanks to ADHD. So that's why I think we should stop berating ourselves and start leaning in to the positive side of the coin, the gift, the spirit, frame it as a spiritual gift, and then say, how's my life different if it's a spiritual gift instead of a disorder? Yeah. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That is the dumbest name ever. Yeah. Don't ever call it that. Never call it that in front of your kids if they have it, or even to yourself.
It's not that way. It's attention abundant. Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about action deficient. This is an issue for ADHD. Because of our executive function being a toddler, we tend to sort of be all over the place. Or we'll look at one item on a to-do list and it'll be Mount Everest to us. So this is the problem of acting versus being acted upon. And I think this is an ADHD contextual scripture too. This is what I believe. Ether 12:6 says, you do not receive a witness until after the trial of your faith. Can I morph that into an ADHD applicable scripture? Yeah. You do not receive motivation until after the trial of your initiative.
Wow.
Motivation does not exist for ADHD people prior to making a move. Stop waiting around for it. It doesn't come. And that's okay. Guess what? It's an awesome thing because it means that we're willing to act more capriciously and more impulsively in a situation where we could be paralytic and overthink something. Just go. Just go. And so you receive the motivation. The motivation starts to happen after you've taken the initiative and taken the step. Yeah. And that is faith. There's two options in life. Either we're in commotion or we're in motion. There's no third option. If we're standing still, refusing to move, waiting for God to tell us what to do, guess what? It ain't going to happen. At least it hasn't happened in my life. I receive revelation when I'm on the move. And is it me or is it the Spirit? Stop worrying about it. Yeah. This is what I've found is Elder Scott talks about packets. Oh, I love this. God drops us packets. So basically, think about it as if you're at the airport and somebody's turned all the lights off and you've got two moving walkways in front of you. You can hear the conveyors whirling, right? You can step on the right or you can step on the left. You don't know which one's this way towards you and you don't know which one's away from you. So the worst thing you can do is just sit and wonder. Yeah. You're not going to get anywhere. So you take that first step and what happens? You're propelled forward or you're propelled back. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't happen until the third, fourth, or fifth, or 10th step. But what I've discovered is as I stand on that and I feel propelled forward, God doesn't just do that. He also gives me a packet just far enough away from the last one that I can test my faith and my own prowess and my own intellectual ideas and my own development and my own progression. But then when I start doubting, am I on this right road? Why am I on this? Oh my goodness. There's a packet. It could be because somebody says something to me that day. It's something I listened to. It's a piece of music that pops up randomly. It could be an impression I have. Look for the packets. Wow. Go just move. Yeah. Move and then look for the packets. And I promise if you look for them, you'll find them.
So is that how, because I would imagine with an abundance of ideas, sometimes there's just a total miss. Like sometimes like you just,
I could tell you stories.
Well, I talk about that because I think there can also be a sensitivity to to being criticized fear. Or being, definitely fear. Talk about when you were really hoping that the toddler was onto something and it turns out it was just like a really bad idea.
That is such a good question. I love that. Okay, let's talk. You want to hear a story I've never told before? Here we go. And now the world premiere of Steve's ignominy. So we're at Tuacahn. We're back at the home crowd. We've been all over the world and here we are back at Tuacahn. I'm like, we got to make this show special. And so my toddler has this great idea. Hey, why don't you throw beach balls out into the audience? And I'm like, what a great idea. Oh boy. So I'm sitting on stage and here is the song. We're playing Fear Elise, but amped up, rock and roll style, And one of my stage crew decides he takes this 20-foot diameter beach ball we got off of Amazon. And he throws it into the audience from the back. Okay. We're in an amphitheater, which is angled down. Oh, no. And the average age of people in the audience is 84. That's a bit of an exaggeration, of course. So I'm got my eyes closed. I'm in the music and I happen to open my eyes right when that beach ball comes hurling down this amphitheater and hits this sweet, wonderful grandma in the back of the head who's got this beautiful bob that she spent all day putting together, right? And so I open my eyes and it just goes, she's like this, she's smiling, and all of a sudden it just goes, boom! And like, it's just like the hair is like all over the place. And she's like, why did a 20-foot diameter beach ball hit me in the back of the head? What is this? I suppose this is a cello piano concert. Oh my gosh. I'm so embarrassed. That was 100% my idea.
Yeah.
And, you know, I asked God while I was vacuuming, which is a great time to pray, by the way. I love just because the white noise, I don't know what it is, you know, and you're doing something good and vacuuming. I'm like, God, you know, I'm worried that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I won't have any ideas.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a dud. And he's like, don't worry. All the ideas are mine anyway, except for the bad ones. Those are yours. I mean, he actually said that because he uses humor as my language, right?
Go, yeah.
But he was trying to get through to me to just say, stop relying so much upon yourself. Like, have confidence that I can keep feeding you ideas as long as you're willing to turn to me. Wow. But the bad ideas, here's the deal with bad ideas, is it's a lesson that I teach my son. We were driving down the road, and he says, Dad, yeah, bud, why do you say things that aren't funny? And I was like, ouch, thanks for that. Okay. And I'm like, but I was Socratic because as a parent, you got to be Socratic. It's the best parenting technique anywhere. So I was like, oh, what do you mean, bud? I was like, what are you talking about? This is painful. He's like, well, sometimes you say a joke or you try something funny and nobody laughs. He's right. And what came out of my mouth was straight from the Spirit. I said, bud, if you're not bombing once in a while, you're not trying hard enough. Wow. The next day, he starts trying things, and they were so bad, so embarrassing. And I'm like, way to go, bud. I was like, way to go. Wow. Instead of like, oh, that was so, no. I was like, yeah. I'm like giving him thumbs up. And the next day he comes home, he's like, Dad, I had a firework today. And I was like, what's that? He had completely transformed my concept into the opposite. He said, oh, a firework is where you say something and it goes off really well.
Oh, a firework as opposed to a bomb.
Yes, I didn't realize that was what he was saying. So now we have this signal system between the two of us. When I'm in a group setting and we're both there and I try to land one and it bombs, I'll look over at him and he'll go, and for those that are listening, he like throws his finger into the air and hits the ground and like blows up like a bomb, like. But then when we do a firework, we throw the finger up in the air and then spray it like a firework in the sky. And what we've discovered is it's how you make friends with failure. Is if you're not failing once in a while, if you're not bombing once in a while, you're not trying hard enough. So you have to laugh with those ideas, and you have to understand that it takes I write a lot of garbage songs before I get a hit one. You know, baseball players step up to the bat, and the best average you could have is a 300. You know, I mean, we're paying them millions of dollars to strike out most of the time. Yeah. So Mozart, do you know how many compositions he wrote?
No.
Over 600 in his 30 years of life. Okay, and I'm just saying from 8 years old, right, until he passed away, right? And how many of those could you sing right now?
Oh, like 3.
Yeah. Mozart wrote a lot of duds, and he is considered the greatest composer of all time. We've got to stop placing the expectation upon ourselves that we've got to write hits all the time. Yeah. We've got to have bombs. We've got to have garbage in order to get the treasures.
Love that.
So that's, take the pressure off yourself. You know, give yourself some grace, some slack. And say, and then the fact is, if we clam up and if we're not trying hard enough, then I think our life won't be as abundant. Yeah. I just don't think so. And it's okay. And you know what? Laugh with the bombs. Just find a person you can signal with that the bomb has gone off. Yeah. But more bombs lead to more fireworks. And I've had so many moments from the stage where I have said stuff that has fallen so flat. But the great thing about it is I feel alive when that happens. And I can discover how to save myself a little bit, you know, and how to laugh at myself. And the audience relates to that so well. When you bomb and you call yourself on it, the audience is like, oh, he's like me. You know, because we all are like that. Yeah. So everybody loves to watch somebody who has a hard time and is able to laugh it off.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Tell me how you, like, it feels like you've got this intensity, like there's this intensity that like is throughout your life. Like, how do you tell the difference between just needing to get yourself motivated and you're not feeling it and just doing it anyway versus like, okay, my life path is evolving and changing and I'm actually being pulled into a new direction. Okay. You know, like I could imagine just overriding that lack of energy and forcing myself into the same groove. And maybe you're being called into a new place. And so if you found a way to sort of discern which one is which.
That's a great question. I think that's what's awesome about that question is there's so much depth to it, because when you think about it, I can't give a one size fits all answer to this because everybody's going to be so different. I think you have to approach it like you have to give everything a chance. And you have to decide on the threshold of giving something a chance and when you've given it enough of a chance. I go where the energy is. I go where the flow is. I go where the ideas come. When God puts obstacles, I don't believe that. I don't necessarily think he puts obstacles. When there are obstacles in the way, I have to decide whether that's an obstacle that I'm supposed to surmount, or whether it's a dead end that's meant to be detouring.
That's exactly what I mean.
And that takes practice. Okay. It's not the best answer, but it takes practice. It takes working with God, and it takes trusting him. Yeah. And the more and more I do it, the more I recognize, okay, I can recognize a difference of feeling. A stupor of thought, what is it? Elder Scott defined it best. He said it's a troubled and uneasy feeling. That's a lot different than cold feet or stage fright or anxiety or like, worry over whether something's going to go right or not. Like that feeling of like an Olympian must feel right before the big match. That's different feeling than a troubled and uneasy feeling. Yeah. So when I hit a dead end that's supposed to be a detour, I feel like it's troubled and uneasy feeling that I can't shake. Yeah. Versus an obstacle where it's like, this is hard, but I'm ready for that. I'm up for this challenge. Yeah. And the thing is, if you keep bumping up against it, by the third or fourth time, if you're not over that obstacle and you're not feeling energy and not feeling the motivation to do it, it probably is a detour. Yeah. Most likely is. Yeah. So just get used to the difference of feelings. Observe the difference of feelings. And if you're not writing it down or journaling or expressing it somehow in a creative way, I think it's very difficult to discern whether you're just processing it, or if you're processing it with your hands, it's a lot different than processing it with your mind only. If you find that you're anxious and or anxious, depressed, or this is actually, in my opinion, the most underutilized, the misunderstood treatment for mental illness in our young people is creativity. You're not being creative enough. And it's because we are children of a creative being. And when we align ourselves with his nature, according to Alma, we align ourselves with the nature of happiness. So the nature of God is what? Creativity. He's an ultimately creative being. That's why when we get creative, we lose track of time, because God is not a time. He's not a being of time, and neither are we fundamentally. C.S. Lewis says we're a fish out of water when we're in time. So I love that we lose track of time when we're in that flow. So that's what I look for. Yeah, I love it. I've never thought about stupor of thought as just like an absence of the energy of ideas flowing. Like, that's so interesting. Yeah. So if I don't get ideas, and that's why when I arc jump, Arthur Brooks, using Arthur Brooks language, for those of you who know Arthur Brooks, if you don't, you should look him up. Yeah, tell us. Yeah, say more about arc jump. Yeah, Christian social scientist, musician that got burned out. So I really relate to that. Turned into social scientist. He talks about how there are just arcs in life, and they go up and they go down. And when they go down, we try to artificially bend them back up with selfish and irrational things. And instead of doing that, he says, let it decline and don't obsess or worry about it, and find another arc in your life that's related but still on the way up. I like that. And that's what I'm arc jumping in my life right now. I don't believe in a midlife crisis. I believe in a midlife crescendo. And the way you do that is you find arcs that are still on their way up, not unrelated. Yeah. That's the mistake we make. It's like, oh, I have to start over. Oh, that's awful. A related arc that's still on its way up. Yeah. So if you're running out of like, if you're not feeling like you can be present in your art form, your creativity or work or whatever it is, and the ideas aren't flowing and you feel like you're not feeling it and it's been some time, look for another arc that's related, that it's on its way up.
Wow. Yeah, I do too. That's amazing. I like, that really just resonates that like, you don't have to stick with something all the way down as your energy is draining. Yeah. Maybe that is part of what the arc is supposed to do.
Well, and candidly, I've been at Piano Guys for 14 years, and I am so shocked that as an ADHD squirrel, I could ever stick with something for that long. Right. And I love it. And I will always be a piano guy, even though I play the cello. I will always be a piano guy, but I have felt a need to take a break because I have felt that arc actually declining.
Really?
And I freaked out because this is like my career. It's my notoriety. It's embarrassing. It's like, ooh, the piano guys aren't as hot as they used to be. Ooh, that's embarrassing, you know? Oh, and we get so, I remember I saw an interview with Larry King with Jerry Seinfeld once where he's like, yeah, he started talking about how Seinfeld ended.
Yeah.
And Jerry
I've seen
flipped
this.
out. Do you remember that?
Yes,
He flipped out
so
on him.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But do you know why he did that? It's because he associated his identity with Seinfeld. And so when Seinfeld went down, he felt he did too. We've got to separate ourselves, decouple ourselves from that. So Johann Sebastian Bach, what a great example. You know, when his son CPE, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, started to get in vogue when he was when the classical period was overtaking the Baroque period, guess what? Bach was old news. Can you imagine the greatest composer, the greatest composers of all time being old hat? Did Bach freak out like Darwin did? Darwin freaked out when he went out of. But Bach decided that he instead would be his son's biggest cheerleader. And he became an instructor. He became someone who would impart wisdom rather than seek his career continuing to grow. Because he found an arc that was related.
Yeah.
So he started building curriculum that we still use today. So I just love that. So that's a matter of just making sure that we're not trying to artificially bend an arc back up because we're embarrassed or we're feeling like we're identifying with that declining. And so candidly, this is what I'm doing. I found an arc that's related. I'm writing a Broadway musical this year.
Oh, wow.
Are you really?
And I've been wanting to do it for 10 years. Yes, it's Les Miserables, but Spanish.
Oh, no. We should have seen this. We should have seen this coming.
Actually, but I was thinking about that because I'm ADHD.
Quick. It was quick, though.
But no, I'm writing about, and I wish I had time to tell you what it's going to be about. I'm very, very excited about it. But it uses so many things I'm already entrenched in, experienced in, and I love. Yeah. But it's another arc entirely that's still on its way up.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Let me ask final question for me. I know we've got to wrap up here. And I don't think this needs to be confined to music by any means, but of all the performers I've ever seen, you have the most pure expression of joy on your face as you're performing. And I imagine that extends to other areas as you're on different arcs as well. Yeah. But could you explain what's going on for you there? Because it is so unique.
My daughter asked me once, why do you always smile in your music videos? Yeah. And I said, well, because I'm thinking of you. And that's very true. But I didn't tell her the other part. When I was young, my dad very candidly once came up to me and he said, when you make a mistake, you show it on your face and it pulls the audience into your mistake. You grimace. They actually inherit your discomfort. Boy, he was brilliant. So I decided from that moment on, I would smile every time I made a mistake. And that's why I smile a whole lot. I make a lot of mistakes. The cello is a great place to make a lot of mistakes. So that's part of it. But here's the real reason. That is really and I would recommend anybody from a life analogy is laugh at yourself more than you are right now. Smile at your mistakes more than you are right now. Give yourself grace more than you are right now. You give so many of your friends so much grace for the mistakes they make, and yet you do not afford the same thing to yourself. You've got to fix that. Yeah. But here's what's really happening. Music for me is my way of saying thank you to God for all that he's done for me. It's my way to access the power of the atonement. One aspect of the power of the atonement we do not talk about is it thins the veil between us and our lost loved ones. My mother gave up her career in opera to raise me. So I'm living her career that she gave up. She passed away of a brain tumor when I was young. And every time I play music, I connect with her. And that's because of Jesus Christ's sacrifice. It's his atoning power that allows that to happen. I don't feel we could be connected to the loved ones on the other side of the veil, nor could they be connected to us without the atoning power of Jesus Christ. When we ask for help, I believe there is a small staging of the ultimate plan. When God unveiled the plan, what did he say? Whom shall I send? And we know what happened then. We had two options. There might have been more, maybe. But the one was like, I got this and it's all about me. And the other one was whatever you need and want, and the glory be yours. I think when we ask for help, I think God says, whom shall I send? And I think my mom says, please send me. It's your glory, but I would love to do that. Sometimes I pray, and if you don't do this, I would really encourage you to do this. Sometimes I pray for specific angelic help. And I say, I'm not practiced enough for this concert. Can you please send a specialist? Can you please send my mom? Don't just give me an off-the-rack angel that's tone deaf, because that's not going to help. You laugh. I'm serious about this. I'm like, I need my mom. Or I need my, when I'm speaking, when I'm doing a keynote, my grandpa was very, very well known for his prowess. And so will you send my grandpa, please? I need his help. And I've felt their direct intervention by the power of Jesus's atonement. And what else would they be doing in the next life? Yes, we talk about missionary work and all of that. Yeah, I agree. But wouldn't they be anxiously engaged in our well-being? Yeah. And when we ask for help, does God directly intervene with everybody? It doesn't seem like it's aligns with his plan. It seems like he would use the loved ones in order to delegate that privilege and blessing to them. Yeah. Because we can't be saved without them. They can't be saved without us. We got to turn our hearts to them. They turn their hearts to us. That's what it's all about. So when I go out on stage, my prayer is that I can play to the one, because I know that there are people in the audience that won't enjoy the performance or kind of tune out or just be like, this is a waste of time or money. And if I focus on those, it's going to totally wreck. But if I can pretend like the concert hall is a living room, which is my favorite venue, by the way, way more than a Royal Albert Hall or Red Rocks or Carnegie. I would take a home performance any day because of the connection that occurs. Yeah. There's no fourth wall. So I try to play to the one, and God will put an entire concert tour together to lift one of his children. That is so hard for us to understand because we're numbers people. We are critical mass. We are social media, how many followers. We are so number crazy, but that's not who God is. It's so one by one. So if I can play to the one, that's why I smile, because I just picture me and somebody in the audience that's brought their heaviness. And if I can help them lighten that load by turning them to God, helping them to feel the Spirit and let the Spirit do the heavy lifting, then it's joy. It's joy. And that joy never gets old. Touring gets old. Deadlines get old. But helping people feel the Spirit and opening hearts to feel God's love, because I have seen people that are members of other faiths or members of no faith and friends of all kinds of backgrounds, that the minute their heart is open with music, God rushes in and says, I love you. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it. I've got you. And they've described that in such beautiful ways that we would never use in Latter-day Saint jargon. I remember one woman described it as a moment of clarity. I love that description of the Spirit. Yeah. So that's why I smile.
Thank you.
Oh my
that's
gosh.
Beautiful.
We have been in rooms where that has happened, and that is an energy that is palpable to the whole, that edifies the whole. And it's so cool to see you using all of these gifts to have those experiences one-on-one with people, because it really has, I think it's doing a deep work that we can all sense. And and it's just a gift that you're also able to articulate it now. You know, like I love that you're arc jumping a little bit, and that you're starting to talk about what happened. So thank you for figuring this out and being open to talking about something so personal. But it's just really is so sweet to be able to feel like we can do this with you and like watch this journey that you're on. And
thank you.
So
thanks for helping me process
it. Thank you so much.
We appreciate
and appreciate this as a spiritual gift. I think the last thing I'd say is, if just talking to parents of ADHD kids, give them grace. I wish somebody would have told my parents this, and they did their best. They did a great job with it, but you need to know your child is already criticizing him or herself so heavily. My challenge to you would be, if they're acting up and if they're being kind of annoying like I was as a kid, you go over and give them a hug. And you say, seems like you're struggling a bit. How can I help? How can I help? It's so easy to grab their arm and just be like, you're annoying, go to your room, you know, and of course you might be at your wit's end. And I know that's hard to do. And it might be really hard not to say negative things, but they're already so negative about themselves in their head, worrying that they're broken. Go give them a hug and say, seems like you're struggling. How can I help? And stress that they have been given a gift, and that if they practice it, and if they find their hyperfocus, insist on abundant creativity. Careful about feeding them sugar. Please be so careful, especially in the morning. Start with protein. because they're going to sit for 8 hours. Just start with protein. And then when they get home from the school, don't insist that they immediately jump on chores or homework. Let them have some free time. Let them have some unstructured time. Be very careful about the media they consume. Don't give them social media. It is a dopamine nightmare. They're dopamine deficient. They're going to go after it and be addicted to it. And then insist that this is a gift that they can develop. Insist upon abundant creativity in their life, that they're always pursuing creative things. Creativity is the best bridge to mental wellness for our young people right now. We're not being creative enough. We think it's a pastime. It needs to be a lifestyle. It needs to be a way of life. At least try it. And remember, reproving B times with sharpness, D&C 121, doesn't work as well for ADHD kids. Following up with an increase of love, start with an increase of love and go from there. And you'll have a much better experience. And then I want to speak to you directly. You're not broken. In fact, it's the opposite. You're built for hard things. And you're built for a divine creativity. And you've got to seek and pursue that. Seek that this is a divine gift that you have. It may look like a to-do list item is Mount Everest. You've got this. You and your ADHD are meant for great things. And if you treat it that way and pray and give it over to God, turn your weakness over to God, He will make your mess into a miracle and turn your weaknesses into strength. And I promise that with all my heart.
Thank you so much. Yeah. It's so beautiful. I feel like you're condensing years of lessons into a moment.
Yeah, a study and personal experience. You know, I think that's what we need. We need both of them when we're trying to address this thing that we don't yet understand fully.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Stephen Sharp Nelson. If Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get the chance, we'd love for you to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. We read all of the reviews and the comments, and we love to hear from you. You can also email us at info@faithmatters.org. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.